City of Stevens Point Sustainability Commission meeting, recorded November 6, 2025.
I would like to call to order November 6th Sustainability Commission for the City of Stevens Point. We'll take the roll. Alderperson Sam Lang. Here. Allison Burr is still on the way. Heather Phillips.
Here. Phelps. Robert Mitch.
Here. Doug Stengel. Here. Greg Knight is here. We have, let's see, I'll read this part of it too. Persons who wish to address the Sustainability Commission on specific agenda items may register the request at this time. Is there anyone present that would like to register a specific agenda item or talk about a specific agenda item? Okay. And then persons who wish to address the Sustainability Commission on specific non-agenda items. We can't discuss them, but if you want to raise them, we can note that. If not, then we'll move on to discussion and possible action. Oh, Allison Beer is here. Okay, so first item of business then is to approve the minutes for the October 2nd Sustainability Commission meeting. Does anybody have any questions on last month's meeting minutes? Any additions or corrections? If not, I'll take a motion to approve those minutes.
Also motion?
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried on the minutes. Okay, and that moves us on to our main topic tonight, which will be a presentation by David Barbier and Michelle Gullickson of the UWSP Office of Sustainability regarding campus climate action planning and accomplishments. And we'll also have some discussion with these folks on how the City of Stevens Point could collaborate with the university, ideas for reductions, how to reduce CO2 emissions, achieve carbon neutrality, potential planning process, outlines, goals, objectives. So I'll turn it over to the Stevens Point University folks.
All right, awesome. Well, I'm going to kick this off. As you said, my name's Michelle. The main focus of this presentation, which we started giving in October and now is November, is to make our stakeholders both on and off campus aware that we have our full draft of the Climate Action Resilience Plan ready for stakeholder commentary and feedback. So that's pretty much what this presentation is going to be. It's relatively brief, and then as other topics you wish to explore, we can obviously be answering questions and having that discussion. So Climate Action and Resilience Plan is kind of a specific term, and we signed with a nonprofit called Second Nature, which is a nonprofit that is guiding usually like institutions of higher education in sustainability planning. So initially, we had signed the carbon commitment back in 2007, and then we signed a resilience commitment in 2023. Packaging those two together, we have a climate commitment, which essentially required that we wrote a climate action resilience plan for the university. The main goals of a climate action resilience plan: for one, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That's typically the climate action piece that we are talking about. Also thinking about building resilient and adaptive strategies, as we're just thinking about not only environmental changes due to climate change, but also social and economic challenges as well. We had talked with stakeholders at a city council meeting, kind of talking a little bit about this process, but not everyone was probably there or maybe knows the entire, kind of overview of the process we have taken along the way. I would say, this kind of shows we laid some of the groundwork in fall 2023, even arguably, summer 2023. The first main task was, hiring me as a grad assistant, because this is like one of my main projects. And then Dave and I, as well as many other folks, worked together to plan a large stakeholder kickoff meeting in the spring of 2024. February 2024, our spring semester. We had over 100 people in attendance for that first stakeholder meeting, and that was faculty and staff and students at the university, and also community members and like local politicians and business owners and such. And after that meeting, once people were oriented to the process we were embarking in, over 90 people wanted to participate in working groups. We had 9 working groups investigating specific aspects of this project. And these working groups over the course of an academic year were able to essentially recommend projects and do some research on as far as like implementing. One thing that we were able to do with the working groups right away is the resilience assessments. That actually might be something interesting that we could collaborate on if you are interested in learning more. We essentially adapted a community engagement model from the Nature Conservancy, which essentially just allows people to talk about their place and the strengths and vulnerabilities when it comes to like climate resilience and things like that. We did a lot of writing and a lot of work over the summer, compiling all that the working groups gave us, and that is why we were able to produce this draft for all our stakeholders' reviews. We're asking people to provide feedback, and then we will go into the final stages of approving and publishing the draft. Before Dave kind of shows you a little bit of, like what this draft looks like at the time being, we do want people to know that when they're looking at the Climate Action Resilience Plan draft, this is not me and Dave and our Office of Sustainability's draft. These are not necessarily our projects. These are written based off the input of literally over 100 people, is input and perspectives on the direction that campus needs to go to reach our goals. The draft that you'll be looking at is also written for a relatively diverse audience, both on and off campus, people who maybe have a lot of context for climate action plans, maybe people who don't have as much context for what a climate action plan is. And rather than being a very detailed technical document, we wanted to write the plan as a digestible overview that people could get a sense of the direction we're going. That said, we do have supplementary documents that do provide some more of those details, but the plan that's available for review now is that higher level. So now I may just scooch over so you can use the computer if you need to kind of show them what we have on our website and talk about how people can provide feedback.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. So the next slide that I'm going to take you to, this is a snapshot of what you can find on the website, and I'm actually going to show that to you in real time because it's actually been updated. So this is quite an active document in terms of our work. I'm just going to drive us around a little bit. So when you go to the university website, if you're looking...
I think that they're still seeing the slide.
Why is that?
Maybe you have to go out of the presentation mode, or you are out.
Or it's 2 screens.
Or pause it, maybe.
It's not a duplicated screen, it's an extended screen.
Well, let's just see if that does it. Technical difficulties?
Is it possible to slide the window? Oh.
There we go. Just had to be patient. Patience is a virtue. Look at that. So if you go to the university website, the easiest way to get to this page is when you get to this top search function, just type in the word climate. And when you do that, this page will come up. So it's pretty easy to find in that regard, which is pretty nice. And subsequently, if you were to click on this sustainability homepage banner, on that page, there's also our CARP draft information. So there's some of the preliminary information about the resilience commitment, and then if you scroll down here into the resilience process planning, you can see all of the buttons as they're sort of indicated around the CARP. So we have the draft here. We've got two different feedback forms with intentionality. So one is specifically focused to the campus audience, and then one is for a broader community audience. And we felt that that was really important given the fact of how much community engagement we've had over the course of this project in the working groups, in the stakeholder meetings. So the forms, if you were to compare them, are relatively similar, but there are a few changes we've made to try and make it more accommodating from a community perspective. Also, if you want to recap this presentation, I did a presentation of this whole slide, which has been recorded, and it's here. So if you're questioning anything that we're talking about or want to go back and refresh, you can do that.
Just a question. As a person on campus, I don't think I've seen this announced. Are you going to make some campus-wide announcement and invite feedback at some point?
Yeah, so we've sort of been laying this out in stages. So we presented, was it yesterday to Common Council? Yeah. So we started with outreach to our branch campuses first and foremost, and so that's sort of where that has been, and that's where that presentation came from. And so we had scheduled to meet with SGA. There was some scheduling conflicts, so we're actually meeting with them next week, Thursday. The following Monday, we're going to be doing a public session at the Pineries in the library. We're hopefully going to start marketing that on Monday. And then we're also going to do a larger lunch and learn to the campus as a whole. I don't think we have that date set yet.
We don't have that date yet.
So, but it'll come sometime before Thanksgiving. And so we'll definitely do a broader marketing at that point. And we're also going to be working on emailing all of the constituents who have helped shape this plan. So there's more to come in terms of us getting that out there.
I hadn't realized how close to the beginning of this stage of the process we're still in.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
We'll be doing MOD too, Messaging
Okay,
Day.
awesome.
Yeah. So this is where you can find the information, essentially, if you want to go back to it. So I want to walk you through a little bit of the plan. It's about 30 pages. Our goal was originally to keep it under 50, so I feel pretty good about where we landed. I want to reiterate Michelle's point in her presentation that this is really designed to be a general overview that anybody with any amount of knowledge can come to. So it is the what about what we're going to do, not the how. If you want to nerd out about the how, we're going to get into that in a little bit. But we've really designed this to try and be approachable, so that way people can actually read through the whole document and take it in. So we start with a table of contents, pretty obvious. These appendices are coming. This is going to be the how. So that will be the nuts and the bolts of sort of what it is we're actually going to do to try and implement some of this planning. And you can see in this table of contents, you have the introduction, which we'll cover, and then our four main areas that I want to point out to you about how our plan is going to be broken down is about communicating our sustainability values, climate action mitigation, climate action resilience, and a thriving campus community. And so we originally, when Michelle and I first talked about this project, we envisioned taking the 9 working groups and sort of making those working groups the sections in this document. And as we as this process has evolved, there was so much interplay between many of the initiatives that working groups were coming back with that it seemed like finding a different way to frame them that helped bring them together would be more apropos in terms of really getting the message across. So you can see the appendixes line up nicely with the different sections, and for a timeline perspective, and we can talk more about this later, those appendices and the carbon neutrality plan, we will go through a second round similar to this with those documents starting in late January, early February. So if everything goes to plan, knock on some wood, all those appendices and the carbon neutrality plan will be rolling out the last week of January. So that's sort of where that is. We start with a land acknowledgement statement, and then some formal things from a message from our interim chancellor and a message from our steering committee. One of the things that it's worth noting is that there are two other folks in here, Sergio Romero and Audrey Webster. Sergio Romero is our research coordinator and does a lot of our data work, and Audrey Webster is a recent graduate who's been working with us. And so we really do have a nice generational span between the people who have helped lead and guide this process. So I think that's really nice. So we start with an introduction, just trying to give you some general information about climate change in general, right? And just sort of setting the table. Thinking about how it impacts Wisconsin, different weather events. We've been prone to our own weather events here, but one of the reasons we particularly highlighted this particular set of data as it relates to heat island impact and redlining is because one of the things we're also trying to drive through in this process is that it is a social related document. It's an economic document. It's an environmental document, right? So all of these things are valid and relevant to the sustainability and resilience conversation, and so we wanted to make sure that we're bringing some of that forward in terms of what we're doing. This is a little bit more of a general synopsis about the plan, and then a little bit about the process that Michelle talked about earlier. Here's a revamped version of our timeline, and we've won almost $37,000 in grants as we've done this, so that's been pretty great for us too. Here are the working groups that Michelle mentioned, so you get a sense of what those were, and each one was working on about 7 different projects if you want to average it out. One of the things to note in this section, so the top rank criteria, so in our second stakeholder meeting that we did in February of this year, we really focused on our constituents having a say in terms of how we prioritize the work. And so we spent a fair amount of time engaging with the group, sort of having them evaluate the criteria that they felt was most important. And so you can see impact and engagement sort of took the tops there. And it's important to note that impact is not necessarily just greenhouse gas emissions related, right? So it's projects that impacts local, regional, and national scale with a focus on equitable results, right? And so we're really trying to make, our constituents and the people who did this work, that's what they want to see prioritized. And so that's what we're trying to do in terms of turning this around and pushing it back out. So a lot of this work is just us reverberating what's been said to us, essentially. And then communicating our sustainability values. So this is a fair amount about what we've done in education that we need to move forward on and how we continue to do that. The climate action and mitigation, this is going to be where we really dig into the carbon neutrality plan. So our carbon neutrality plan for the university was approved in 2011 and sets us out on basically a 40-year runway to get to carbon neutrality with 10-year benchmarks and a 25% reduction per every 10 years. So our first goal was 2020 and a 25% reduction. Our second goal is 2030 and a 50% reduction. I can happily tell you that last year, according to our greenhouse gas emissions report, we were at a 51% reduction from our 2007 baseline. I would also tell you that that is a very dynamic number because, as many of you probably know, there's a lot of construction and demolition happening on the campus, right? And so it's very possible that when we finish our greenhouse gas reporting this year, we could be at 43%, just in the nature of what's going on. And as it relates to that, generally speaking, until we aren't building or knocking anything down for like 2 years, that's when we'll really start to know like where we're at, because it takes a while to get all of that data and really validate what we're doing. That being said, we are updating this plan. So it is currently going through, revamping, for lack of a better word, with a focus on these particular areas. I can tell you our 2011 plan is a very comprehensive document in terms of telling us what we should do, but it doesn't tell us how we should do it. And so we're really trying to use this update to the carbon neutrality plan to provide some more of that guidance, particularly from our stakeholders about how we do that. These are some of the things in terms of decarbonizing travel that we're going to see as part of that. And then the climate action and resilience section. So this really starts to take on how do we build a more resilient campus and community. And so some of the things that we're talking about are already in process. So there is a SafePoint app that's available to the campus for improved emergency preparedness and responding. So, and we've noticed that as we're working on initiatives, some of the initiatives we're working on are actually happening now. So, for example, in one of the appendices that I was just looking through today, there's an update, the Campus Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan. We're actually in that process right now. So some of our things are ongoing and are already happening. This just happened to be one of those things, and so we thought we'd put it in there. I'll also just point out this picture of the destruction here. That's in front of Nelson Hall, where our office is located out of, and that happened in 2019 when we suffered about a 5-day outage of power across the city. So intentional about trying to bring some of this home, that the effects we're talking about, we're already experiencing. This is why we need the emergency preparedness. This is why we need the resilience, because we're dealing with it in real time. And then here's a page filler because it's a booklet, so we need to have even numbers of pages. So, but you can see we've got our Marshfield campus in there. That's intentional. We don't have a new location of our NTC aerial photo. So, and then here's some more of the resilience and the hazard plans that we need to be working on. Things dealing with ice, extreme heat, wildfires, and air quality. And then particularly of note for us are going to also be flooding and power outages. If you've been on the campus at all, you know that power outages can happen frequently and surprisingly. So trying to create that resilience within the institution as a whole. And then what we're going to be doing as it relates to curriculum as well to try and increase sustainability and climate change education across the campus, not only for our students, but for our employees, for our university staff. There's a lot of education that needs to go on, and essentially that's what a large part of this process is about, just in terms of doing the process and getting the word out and doing these sorts of presentations. And then I think we ended on this idea of a thriving campus and community because we also want to focus on the fact that we're really trying to create the future we want, right? And so that's really the goal of this document. And we want to create a campus that is thriving, that is engaging, that is really a bountiful place. And so we're really trying to make sure that that comes through in terms of the work that we're doing and how we're going to do that. So looking at campus wellness, looking at improved partnerships between the campus and the community, protecting our environment, really creating and growing on a lot of the things that we're doing, creating a zero waste plan for UWSP, and really moving that forward. And then we've got some additional terms at the bottom, which I won't go into, but you could go back and read some of where this information is coming from. And so again, now let's see how this works. Look at that. That worked nicely this time. I'm going to hold a minute, assuming that it will come back to fruition here. So, so as we talked about, the supplementary materials are going to be forthcoming in the spring of 26. And again, that will be more of the nitty-gritty. So if you're starting to want to nerd out a little bit about the details, or you want to know more about how we're trying to tackle and approach some of these problems, that'll be a time when you can do that. And Michelle and I envision, I think I can say that we'll be doing a whole nother round of this sort of outreach once those appendices are live. So we'll be spending time in February getting out to the community, getting out to the campus, sharing those documents, looking for feedback on those documents, and really trying to make that as robust a plan as possible. So the feedback we want, as it relates to this draft, is questions, comments, or concerns. So things that you're worried about that you don't see mentioned, things of that nature. And if we missed something, considerations that we didn't cover or that weren't discussed, right? So I'll continue to restate the fact we're simply reverberating what we've been told. And so, and we've added some things here and there based on our own expertise and what we know from our office. However, it's very possible that we didn't get everything. So if there's something else that you're like, hey, you need to talk about this, let us know. And then we're also very interested in any design or layout. So we're trying to make this draft, as I've said, approachable. We're trying to make it aesthetically pleasing. We want it to be something that folks want to spend their time looking through and engaging with. So if there's ways to design it or to lay it out, we're also interested in that feedback. The one thing to note down in the corner, we're not interested in the grammar police feedback. So we've got a great team, and this is a rough draft, so we'll continue to read through this and work it over, but we don't need everybody's commentary on how all the lines are written. So just in terms of what feedback we're looking for. And then here's a QR code, so if you did want to scan that and have that access on your phone or what have you, you can. One of the things to note is the deadline, right? So you have plenty of time at this point, well over a month, to review the document. If you want to, share this to City Council in one of your updates, they'll have plenty of time to be able to go in and look at this, which I'm assuming it will transpire, move up that way. But yes, getting that feedback to us by December 12th will be important, because then over the winter, I'm in the break, and into January is when we're going to start working on some of that incorporation. That ends our sort of formal presentation for you all this evening. So I think we're about halfway of the time, Greg, you wanted us to spend. So now we're definitely available for Q&A.
Okay, and I guess maybe just to sort of put a framework on our questions, any questions you have, first of all, but also one of the purposes or goals for our commission tonight is to maybe have some dialogue or start some dialogue with the university folks about how the city's commission might collaborate or work with, or suggestions for how we do our process as we move into 2026. So I'll start it there.
So let's start right there with that question. If we can pose that to Michelle and Dave, do you have any suggestions on how the city and the university can work together to move this forward?
I know on my end, I've been meeting with various members of city and county governance on some of the projects. Some of them are, I think some of that language is described in this plan. The language is even more intentional, like in the appendices where we talk about the how. In particular, a lot of the traffic infrastructure projects as well as the emergency preparedness projects are topics that I've met with like city and county officials with, but that's not to say that obviously those are the only projects that could be sort of prioritized with like the partnership aspect. I think you could make the argument that any project could be enhanced by more collaboration. What do you want to say, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I think the infrastructure, right, will clearly be an obvious connection. But I think there's also probably other opportunities when we think about scale. And projects inevitably become more financially attractive when they can be done at scale. And so I think that is an opportunity depending on what types of projects we're looking at. I'm sort of in my head thinking about energy, but I think it could be applied to a variety of things. And I think that partnership creates an opportunity, at least from my limited experience. A partnership between the campus and the community has a much more unique appeal to granting agencies, I feel like. When there are multiple partners working on a collaborative project that will benefit multiple constituents, that makes people who are doling out big chunks of money much more interested to talk about, like, oh, how is this working? How are you collaborating together? I think there's a variety of things that you could probably see from health and wellness. That could be a connection to city partnership. I think there's some transportation issues, particularly around busing, that have a clear connection in terms of route expansion, access, cost, all of those things. So I think there's a variety of ways that could come into play. One of the things that I would also ask as a sort of rebuttal to that, back to the commission, and this is maybe just my own ignorance, is like, I don't have a full perspective personally about like what your goals as a commission are, right? So I don't know if your goal is to simply create a climate action and resilience plan for the city. I don't know if your goal is to get to carbon neutrality by a certain point. So I think those sorts of bits of and pieces of information would also be sort of telling in terms of like where that potential could be. And I also think like there's potentially projects that we want to work on as an institution that might serve as examples for the city to take forward and try and work on that come out of this process.
I've also, at various conferences, have seen a lot of cool examples of like outreach and education being done collaboratively between like communities and campuses, just as far as like thinking about different campaigns around, you know, for example, like a reduction of waste campaign that, you know, it doesn't have to be just the city pushing out that campaign or just the campus pushing out that campaign. It can be done more collaboratively.
I just want to say right off the bat, I think it looks great design-wise.
Cool.
I loved it. I'm excited to read it tomorrow.
Yay, thanks.
You know, maybe one quick comment along that line too is I think the commission's mandate is pretty broad, and it was sort of designed that way because we needed to really look at, you know, first of all, we've spent most of the time to date in 2025 looking at the entire city operation and everything we're doing, and sort of cataloging that, you know, to get a broad view of, you know, well, what have we done? What have we accomplished? And what fits into that whole sustainability spectrum? And now, as we roll into 2026, we got to start thinking about, well, what is our planning process? What do we want to achieve by the end of 2026? It's time to put some benchmarks together. And then my personal view at this point in time, what I know at this point is, we're a small commission compared to other municipalities. When you look at what they've been doing, they clearly have a lot more people involved. So we're not at that level, but that's also, maybe because we're just getting started, and then, maybe that helps us figure out where we end up in the long run, further define here as we roll into 2026.
This does look great. I can't wait to get into this. As you said, do some nerding and getting into the weeds. One of the things that I was hoping that we could, I'd say, explore further is collaboration efforts around meeting our carbon commitment. So I'm trying to think here, is it 40 or 50? 50. We're trying, is the commitment we've made. And so reaching that carbon neutrality goal is a big part of what this commission has been tasked with. I'd say building the capacity around resiliency is another thing that I know, having talked with staff, like we have a few things, especially around the hazards when it comes with floods and the storms getting worse, that are concerning. Like if these, let's say, storms come with higher winds, we'll be losing trees at a higher rate than we've seen historically. We are a city that is canopied in many places, and understanding what does that look like, I think, is something worthwhile studying because it's our legacy. If we're going to be losing trees because of climate change, how do we build a more resilient, forestry program? That'd be something, I think, because that is part of, say, what we already have as a strength when it comes to meeting our carbon commitment is we have a strong city forestry program. And if that's something we need to lean into or say double down on protecting, that'd be something I feel like it'd be worthwhile studying. And I know that campus over there generates quite a few foresters. And so there's maybe an opportunity here for some good work to be done. Not just for us as a city, but maybe something that the larger region can study as well. I was hoping maybe that would be something we could see done here, is work in our city forestry and at the campus to see what does resiliency mean now that we're seeing, say, our forests. You have a great picture of this storm here in the lamp down. It's that's becoming more and more common. So that's one of these things I'm hoping to see us do, because it's also our air quality. And it's something that hits very close to home with me. I'm an asthmatic. That summer of 2022 with the wildfires, it was hazy and smoky. You guys can remember, and we're in the middle of forestry. If anybody's air was going to be clean during that, it was going to be our air, and it still wasn't. And so I'm kind of looking at that, going that's a canary in the coal mine. Our air quality is something we ought to be concerned about just as much as our water quality. I know we talk a lot about water quality around here because it's important, but our air quality too seems to be one of these things that plays second fiddle sometimes to that. So I would love to see a little bit more collaboration, and as you said, that kind of marketing and messaging, awareness and education in the community around our efforts that we've already had in place and what we're going to try and do in the future.
Yeah, on the resilience topic, just as far as, I hope you all do have an opportunity to use the feedback form and read this document and everything. That would be great from the city perspective to understand if we are missing or really hitting something very well in terms of resilience, like you said, air quality, water quality, emergency preparedness, that's all in the plan. But a lot of it, these conversations were usually had around campus properties. And so we have tried to think about the boundaries being much larger, for water quality, for instance, as large as a watershed, which is a huge area. But, just kind of if we didn't expand enough of our thinking kind of around that, we don't have this strict boundary between campus and community when it comes to environmental factors and emergency factors. That would be great feedback.
Other thing I was curious about is what sort of opportunity for work experience can the city kind of offer in these sort of spaces? Like if we're doing like what was that? Greenhouse gas emissions kind of a catalog, like we know what it is. Is there an opportunity for students to get some like real world experience working as like an intern with one of our departments? Those sort of things, like I would hope we can continue to expand on getting people real world experience in their fields that they're like pursuing.
Yeah, to that end, like one of the things that I would think about as we talk about where the collaboration potential is, and that I think could be a real source if it's done intentionally, would be to look at, as you start to build your program and think around where the work is and where the development needs to come, like that can definitely, and I say this hopefully in the most positive way, can be done on the backs of students, right? Like if you design to do this work with an internship and a fellowship program in mind where you can pay students a reasonable rate to come in and do the work, there are definitely students that want to do this type of work, right? And so that's a good way to bring in young people with energy into your forestry department, into your water department, who have relevant skills, who want to be doing this work, and can really help to strengthen, like, okay, here is this confluence of young people working between the university and the community. So when we're talking about building that relationship, I think that's a great opportunity, right? And especially if it can be done well, where you're like, all right, we're going to build out a sustainability fellows team of 10 to 15 people to come in and do this. Now, of course, it will cost money, but like it always costs money, right? And I think you could get some really great energy in that regard and also build that relationship at the same time.
I will just point out that when I was getting my degree at UW-Eau Claire, I took an honors level course in calculating the university's carbon footprint to meet our university's requirement for a carbon footprint calculation to present to the chancellor. And we spent a semester learning about climate change and doing the inventory as students. And considering that it ended up with me here, I think it was a very positive experience.
Right.
I think I did also see a hand in the audience.
Yes, I'm just wondering sort of what this proposal, how this proposal intends to sort of interact with the students. What are the specific communications methods and sort of the general ways that the proposal will try to involve students? For example, will it go through the student government, the various student civil organizations, like maybe I know there's as a member of student law enforcement, or the Wildlife Society on campus?
Yeah, I guess just to clarify, are you kind of talking about getting feedback on it, or like once it's published, how can students get involved in the projects that are part of the plan, or possibly both?
Sort of both, like both feedback and sort of like how you intend to communicate where this process is going with students.
Okay, yep. Yeah, I mean, we have done quite a bit, but nothing's perfect because everybody is blasted with social media and emails and messages of the day. We have used all those tactics. We've also invited students to be in like working groups and stakeholder meetings. And then we have been working with SGA the whole time. I've been updating them probably like once a semester. I have worked with a couple of clubs, but I forget what they were called, which is the one that Becca
Environmental.
The ENA,
yeah.
Environmental Caters Naturalists Association.
Yeah, so I have done some of those talks, and by request, like if you're a part of a student organization and you want me to come and talk to your student organization, I would love to do that. So that is how I've gotten like connected with some student organizations. Yeah, for this kind of moving forward, we're probably going to be leaning into social media, message of the days, those kind of things to make sure that students know that this plan is out there. Do you have other things to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only other thing that I would say is that we have engaged students throughout all of this process. And there is also a limit to what we can do, right? So we can't force engagement on folks, and so it's also part of like, yeah, if we put it out in a SMOD and MOD and we do a presentation and we put it on social media, and people don't show up, then people don't show up. So I think it's also like there is part of it on the student engagement end that students need to come to that. And I think in terms of the project work going forward, while I can't say for sure because it's in the future, I think we had students on almost every working group that originally came together. And so I would imagine that as these projects evolve and go out, that same mentality will hold in place. And so I can't say that for sure because I won't be managing each one of these projects, hopefully, thankfully. That would be a lot. But I think the student voice is obviously very important and powerful in terms of what we're doing. I mean, that's why we had an undergraduate on the steering committee, right? So like we've had an undergraduate involved with our process for a good portion of it. And then, yeah, so, and I think as Michelle said, if like, you know, we're keen to talk to people about what we're doing.
Definitely, yeah. If there's an interested audience that we haven't hit yet, like I'm all for it, because some of it is just like been a little bit of a struggle to find like a really engaged audience, because, well, mostly probably because students are super busy and doing like tons of stuff. One other thing too, you know, we were talking about interns with the city level, students, undergraduate and graduate students. Like I myself am actually a grad student. This is my project, so this is a student project technically as well, and so students do a ton of work at UWSP and a ton of awesome work, and I can only see that really increasing with all these like awesome projects coming down.
One thing sort of as a side to that, but part of the earlier conversation too, when we were just talking about the spreading the boundary of this plan or where it is. And I think one thing that I don't think we really discussed that I just want to mention is that in these stakeholder meetings and in our working groups, we've had people from the Marshfield branch campus, we've had people from the Wausau branch campus, we've had people from our field station out in Custer, the Central Wisconsin Environmental Station, we've had people from Tree Haven, and so we've been intentional about bringing them in and asking them to think about this not only as a plan for the campus here, but also for a plan as it relates to their locations. So we have really tried to have a broad scope when thinking about making sure we're bringing as many people from our sort of constituent group into this conversation as possible.
Yeah, going just kind of off that on a slight tangent, but I think it's important. Another group that I have worked slightly with is the Great Lakes Intertribal Council, and they haven't been able to be like robustly engaged in this process, but they were able to send someone like a representative at our UW-Wausau like community resilience assessment. And yeah, I just think like working with tribes, it can be difficult because in some ways it can seem disingenuous, I think, to be like approaching if we don't really have like really like concrete reasons and ways and like relationships. But I think it's an important part of the work for sure to just be kind of aware of different people that you can engage, different groups you can engage, and I could definitely lend some advice for what it's worth, like as you're going through your plan as well.
Appreciate that. Yeah. My question I had was, if we're going into the future here, we're going to be, as a committee, studying and recommending things. Is there something that you guys have identified that, say, communities across Wisconsin, the Midwest, when doing this sort of thing, this is the thing we need to be studying, like out the gate, like if you were to say, hey, study this so that you can recommend some things, like, is there a thing you guys have identified, like what should we be doing kind of thing generally as the state?
We have data on every resilience assessment that we've done. We have worked with the data in various ways and for different audiences. I don't know if we've ever asked specifically that question to the data, but it's definitely something that we could chew on and get back to, because especially at Marshfield, I was at the cultural fair that was a community population, and we asked them literally what matters to you in the community. So we have that data.
Okay.
And I think I'll take a different stab at answering that question. And I think really the most important thing when you're doing this work is the kind of thing we're doing right now. Communication, outreach, talking about it, explaining why it's important. The communication aspect, you can look, the Yale Communication Center on Climate is really chef's kiss in terms of explaining why we need to have these conversations. And part of the problem is people get hesitant when they want to talk about climate change or how they're going to talk about it. And so I think coming up with tactics, plans for being able to have conversations that address these issues, right? Because when we're talking about power outages, that's a climate change issue, but people might not want to talk about it in that way, right? But if you can talk about being without energy for 5 days, now you've got a different conversation point to talk about, right? And so those sorts of things, I think really that's the most important thing, is learning how and being able to talk about it and have conversation about it and engage community about it. And that's really,
Thank you.
that's where it starts, in my opinion.
That's great. So this is a really, obviously, very broad topic, right? Sustainability encompasses much of many things. And you even started out with 9 working groups. So how did you coalesce around those areas of action that you kind of came up with in your plan? So what did you have, 4 or 5, I think it was like that? I'm just curious what your process was to get that winnowing down to that, because I think that is something that we're going to need to definitely be able to focus on.
I was the one who made that. How did I don't know. I think that I was, I think to me, drawing concept maps and trying to understand inner relations. I think in our culture, we think about things very distinctly, and everything has to fit into a perfect category, but sustainability work encourages us to view things more systematically. So I wish I had the exact iterations that it all went through to get here, but it did go from 63 projects in 9 working groups to me deciding to be a little bit more by topic. I think the mitigation and resilience, those 2 topics seemed worth kind of breaking up, because with the climate action and resilience plan, you have climate mitigation and climate adaptation. And climate mitigation is really around the decarbonization. And to me, that seemed, okay, then that can kind of be in its own category, so to speak, when we're organizing the document. And then climate adaptation is a lot more broad, is a lot more interrelated. So I think that's when I decided to kind of break the rest of it into those structures. And I would say one thing, this is sort of my own philosophy, I guess, but as far as why I included the ecological stuff in the Thriving Campus community, I was of the mind that in order to make deeper changes, toward this work, we really need to view non-human entities in our community as our community. So I was intentional to kind of like not separate the humans and the environment as much as putting them in like totally distinct sections.
I think you made a really good set of choices there.
Nice. Like, I wish I remembered how.
Fair. So, it was mentioned a little bit earlier that you have a lot of data, and the question was asked, what was the common or the most common themes? Like, could you prioritize it? I mean, is that sort of in this report or in this summary?
I don't think it's in this summary, and that might be some feedback for us to add is like, hey, this would be a good thing for you to add in terms of how that is being prioritized.
And the reason I asked that question is I'm thinking of it in terms of, well, what will the city come up with? Because I think we were already kind of getting an idea of that with having talked with all the various departments. That does appear to be some themes that are sort of coming apparent. And so it'd be really interesting to know if any of that crosses over with what you folks are looking at or seeing.
Yeah.
Anecdotally, like without looking at the data, but just based on like my memory, and I was like Dave and I were kind of like running all the resilience assessments, I would say, well, first off, in the first stakeholder meeting, mental health was actually the biggest, which is pretty peripheral to this plan, but it's a direction that people wanted to go and wanted to talk about and wanted to feel heard and is related to resilience for sure. As far as like with the actual assessments, I did notice quite a lot of like traffic infrastructure topics really like rising up, especially in terms of 4th Ave and Division Street. People are pretty passionate about talking about those challenges. So.
Passionate to the point where we had to walk Michelle off the ledge. Like, I can't take any more.
I can't hear any more about 4th Avenue.
Okay, so with another example with that, the bicycle pedestrian plan.
Yep.
And that's actually a countywide thing, right?
Yes.
And so what I know of that is, okay, so it's a countywide thing. City's also working on it.
And the campus has their own.
Yep. So what is Plover doing? What is Whiting doing? And then, it encompasses ultimately the whole county, right?
Right.
And it seems like that's an important topic.
Yeah, well, I mean, transportation and the ability to decarbonize our transportation and make that a viable reality is a huge thing, right? And, I was here for the Stanley Street Road Diet conversations, right? Where it was like, oh my goodness, Stanley Street, if you do that, is gonna like blow up, and we did it, or the city did it. I live in the village of Plover, so I'm not officially a Stevens Point resident. But I mean, you can go on Stanley Street now and it's totally fine and much more accessible. And there isn't backed up traffic. There isn't all of these things that were projected, right? And so you can look at that on a certain level for conversations and be able to say like, well, here's the data from us actually doing it. What do we actually see happening? I think one of the things when we were talking earlier about this connection, I think trying to identify some of the opportunities to take similar positions or stances are also really telling. One of the things that I can just think about really easily is our waste and what does that look like and what are we trying to promote. I would love at some point to see us completely get rid of single-use disposable plastic on the campus to the point where I'm working with procurement for our next vending contract to really drive that home as much as possible, right? And so that is also something that is in theory, I'm sure the city's got vending machines, right? And I'm sure they have certain providers or how they do that, right? And so trying to think about well, where are those opportunities? Or, we see that the city's got a curbside composting program. The university is known for its composting program. But we don't have that at every household. But yet there are communities all around this country and, this continent that do have that. So it's like, well, those are things where we've got an opportunity to say, like, giddy up, this is what we need to get onto. And if you look at, like, some of the data, Project Drawdown, for example, when they talk about, like, well, what's the most important thing you can do? Like, composting is at the top of the list. And, like, we clearly have the passion, the people, and the infrastructure to do that. And so I think, too, there's this opportunity to sort of figure out, like, well, what are we trying to do as the university when we're maybe a couple of steps ahead of y'all? And what of that is the city willing to sort of go, like, yeah, we need to get on board with that because that makes sense, so let's do that together. And one of my jobs that I was hired for many years ago was to improve our university's storytelling about this work, right? And let me tell you, if we can take this from a conversation or writing a story about this is what the university is doing to writing a story about, like, this is what the university and the city and the county are all working on together, that's a much better story.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately, whatever the city comes up with in our planning process, that's exactly what should be part of the goals. Exactly. We're a metropolitan area in some respects because we have Whiting and Plover and what's that other little burg?
Hull?
Hartridge.
Hartridge.
Yeah.
Don't want to leave anybody out. But there's certainly collaboration to make all of this work, to make sustainability work. I mean, it really would require that. One entity can't just do it all, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're talking about, like, what commissions and departments you need to work with and connect to, forestry, water, it's like my job is about connecting the dots on the campus. When people show up and they're like, well, who do we need to talk to? You need to go talk to this person. You need to talk to that person. Our office doesn't get anything done on its own, period. End of story. Like, it is all about collaboration and figuring out how to make those entities that in many cases might not work together normally realize that they have a reason to work together and figuring out how to facilitate that to make that effective.
Quick question, what office were you a part of?
We're in the Office of Sustainability in Nelson Hall.
Sustainability, and I guess, what, like, sort of, in terms of the routine power outages, I know the university has its own power grid, sort of, are you planning to introduce more green energy? Like, how exactly do you plan on addressing the power outages? Like, green energy can be nice, but are you going to actually, like, improve and maintain the current power plant? Like, what are your plans to sort of ensure more specifically reliable power?
Yeah. So I'll try and answer both parts of your question. So as it relates to the heating plant on the campus, that is definitely an elephant in the room, right? In terms of our Scope 1 emissions, it is a huge producer of greenhouse gas emissions. And so if we're going to continue to move along our path to carbon neutrality, we have to deal with that. And I think most recently, we did work with a national consultant to look at how we decarbonize. And so one of the things on our campus, we have 4 boilers. The reality is we are probably overbuilt in terms of how much capacity we have compared to how much capacity we use. Even when you think about, like, January deep freeze and it's 50 below zero for 5 or 6 days, we're not running all of our generators or our boilers at 100% capacity that whole time. So if we can survive something like that without having to reach 100% capacity, that tells you we have more than we need. The other thing is that our boilers are well past their built life expectancy. So I think they were put in service in 1960. Don't quote me on that, but right around that era. And they're built for 50 years. So 2010, 2015, they're basically past what they've been built for. Now, part of what we're seeing is that those boilers, because they're not run hard, are lasting longer, right? And so if we were to be running them at 100%, they'd probably be done by now. But because we only run them at 25, 30, 40%, they're lasting longer. Plus, they get really good care. But the reality is, we know that at some point before 2050, they will need to be replaced. And so our goal or our intention is to get ahead of that. And rather than wait till that happens and then have to go like, okay, well, we're just going to stick the same thing in there, we want to know how much are we overbuilt by, so we know how much capacity we really need. And then once we know how much we really need, then the next question is like, how much of that can we transition off of fossil fuels into an electric, renewable, geothermal alternative? So that way, when we get to that point of replacing those boilers, we're actually know where we want to go and we've done the work. And in my biased, hopeful world is like, as we do that stuff, we won't wait until we have to do it. We'll proactively start approaching it in a way that we can actually say like, yep, we're going to move forward with this because we know this is what we want to do anyway, and we don't want to wait until the emergency happens to actually get started. We want to be ahead of that. As it relates to other forms of energy on the campus, my goal is to move in that direction as much as possible. You can see the new Student Resource Center that's coming online. That'll be opening, in the spring or summer. It's going to have a 380 plus megawatt installation on the top of it.
Do you mean kilowatts?
Kilowatts, yes. I do mean kilowatts. Thank you. So 380 kilowatt array on the top of it. We've got other issues in terms of some buildings that were built long ago that even with new roofs, they don't have the infrastructure capacity to host solar PV on them. But we've got lots of other creative opportunities too. There are more and more solar covered parking lots, which we've got a lot of. We've got a lot of parking lots that could be a potential for where we bring in more solar to create even more renewable energy. And I think the goal would be in that process to develop a plan to have multiple battery backup systems, so that way when the power goes out, the power on campus stays on. And I probably have a different view than lots of folks when it comes to this, but like my real hope is that in 10 years from now, when we have a massive climate situation as it relates to weather, that when the power goes out in the community, people can come to campus, they can get a hot shower, they can charge their phones, they can get a meal, because we will be resilient and ready for that. So we can have a thriving community. So when those things happen, we're prepared to help support the community deal with those things.
I'm just wondering sort of like the reliability of it, since, for example, if it's constantly cloudy and snowing, that reduces the effectiveness of solar. Many battery backups are also expensive, and it would have to be insulated because the cold will effectively drain their batteries. I mean,
But
any electric car, you can see it drains.
I think a lot of building resilience is like building a lot of like parallel systems. So like as of now, for instance, we do have some generators that are like natural gas, right? Or propane generators. And, we're not looking to recommend, we have to get rid of all those because they produce, their greenhouse gas emissions, because that would detract from the safety, especially when it comes to vulnerable places like our field stations. We might actually be recommending that they invest in something like that for the short term. So it's kind of like, it's sort of like you don't go like all in for one direction, like you said. We don't want to go all solar, because if we don't have enough solar power, it won't be reliable. So kind of building a lot of parallel infrastructure.
And I think even to clarify, as it relates to like when I'm talking about the boilers and like replacing those, there's 4 boilers. We're not going to replace all 4 of them. Right? So like there will always be some sort of fossil fuel based system on the campus to be able to back up whatever other reality we transition to. So there is a balancing act. And I think like with some of the issues you're discussing, whether it's the thermal insulation on batteries, like that will all be part of the conversation in terms of the problem solving that we have to do. My job is about being told, no, you can't do that, or here's why you can't do that, and then figuring out how to do that. And if I wasn't good at that, I wouldn't be still here talking to you 12 years later. So.
Yeah, there's a lot of design considerations that can overcome many of those obstacles. Recommend, like, if you're concerned about snow, you put solar modules on the ground and you put them on a rack that adjusts so that you can put them at a better angle and capture more of that sun's energy. I worked at a company where we did a month. We went March. We took March because we knew it wasn't going to be a very sunny month, but we took it and we went off-grid. The office building was off-grid. We had 3 Tesla Powerwalls and a Generac battery, so we had about 40 kilowatts of backup energy. And then I kind of wrote a story about how we did that and what happened. And there's a technological aspect to it, but there's also a social and educational aspect of it, because when you're doing that and you're in that scenario where you're relying on limited power resources, you don't make a bunch of pizzas in an electric pizza oven and turn on a bunch of space heaters. Like, you've got to be cognizant of your conditions. So when you're talking about a power outage, you're not talking about replacing it completely with power. You're talking about emergency backup power, so you shouldn't need as much, and you're cognizant of where that power is going. And many of these battery systems have elements already built into them so that they can live in extreme environments. I would recommend, if you're interested, going to check out Bubolt's Nature Center over in Appleton. They are off-grid, and they have multiple different ways that they are producing power to supply the battery that is there, that is ultimately feeding the system. So they can charge that battery from solar. They can charge that battery from a hydrogen thing that they have. I wouldn't probably recommend that. But they have a wind turbine that they can do to charge those batteries. So they have multiple methodologies. So in all of this, resilience is the key. And I think it's really important that the university has that as part of their plan, because like Dave said, you can't always rely, and Michelle said, you can't rely on one thing. You've got to think about ways that you can make it work if one of those breaks or doesn't perform the way that you think about it. So those are certainly design challenges, but they are not overcome. They can be overcome.
Yeah, one other just thought going off of that with the question of batteries and generators. I was reading an article recently in Grist discussing the risks of flooding with hospitals. And what I found particularly striking was in their map showing the 170 odd hospitals in the U.S., most at risk of flooding. That included 2 right here in Stevens Point, which is a little worrying. The one right over here, and then what one that is? The one out.
Marshfield Clinic.
Yeah, that one, Marshfield Clinic. But it was fascinating that one of their points was it is not necessarily just a question of whether the hospital building itself floods. I living across the street from this hospital, I've always figured if there is flooding, I go to that building because it's taller. But it's also a question of, are the roads around it flooded out such that if you realize you need to evacuate people, you cannot get out by ambulance? And it's also a question because generators are usually outside the hospital on the ground floor. They will be the first thing to flood, and then suddenly you don't have the backup power that you thought you were going to have. And I gather that was a very significant issue in Katrina. And so, I have an electric car. I have seen the range drop in winter, and it's kind of annoying. But the fact that you can put batteries inside buildings without giving anyone carbon monoxide poisoning, and they don't have to be at the ground floor, I think there is a lot of potential there for resilience when you are not venting something with toxic fumes.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of along that whole topic that we sort of got from some of the feedback from the various city departments is, that whole topic of resiliency when power goes out, and our questions for them about, well, how do you keep operations going? And the good news about that is, the city departments have thought about that and are continuing to think about that. But you're right, we're kind of flat, and we depend on infiltration for rain events, but when the rain is heavy enough, you can't infiltrate fast enough, and so you will have flooding.
Yeah.
And I would imagine at some point, that's going to be one of the planning exercises for somebody to do, is to work on flooding scenarios and what that might look like.
Yeah, I know I started that conversation with Justin kind of about the county, and I was like, just especially after the summer and all the flooding just nationwide, it feels like a conversation we really need to have. And to your point too about evacuation routes,
This is a little bit different, but kind of in that same building structures in parallel. One of the things that I find to be curious is right now we're all over the state trying to find a way to create new construction. We need to grow because, things are getting more expensive and every municipality needs to continue services or tries to. And so creating new tax base. And so drawing industry to your communities is one of these things. And so as a community, when we develop, and we're talking about trying to develop in a sustainable way and increase our resiliency, are there things that the community's doing at this point that's hey, if the city was trying to attract a new sort of business or industry, that there's an opportunity to collaborate. So you have graduates that have a place to go and find a job, that kind of a thing. And I'm looking at, the site selection group thing that we had presented the other week, where it's we're hoping to bring some industry to this area. Are there things we should be preferring? Are there things that's hey, we can be part of this green revolution, creating, things that go along with green jobs, those kind of things that go into building a resilient community as well as good jobs and growing our tax base as a municipality?
I mean, when you're thinking about industry and business, the first thing that I come to or that I think about is the intentionality of design and process, right? The intentionality of, if they're going to build a new building, what kind of building is it going to be? Are they prioritizing efficiency? Are they prioritizing, designs that are basically allow for multi-use in case this design or this industry doesn't last 25 years? How can that building be repurposed, right? Re-envisioned, and that comes in the design phase of thinking about a construction project. But the other things that I think about with business if you want to talk about building a sustainable community, then you start to think about some of the other things that are in here. What are they doing for wellness for their employees? What's their plan for that? What's their plan for how people are going to be able to access their facility if they don't want to bring a car? Like, how are they thinking about these things? If it's a water-intensive industry, what are they going to use to basically make sure that that water is going back into the water table cleaner than what they got it out, right? These are questions of intentionality versus just go ahead, right? I think if you want a snapshot of that, you can look at the data center conversation that's happening around the state, right? And it's like, I think there are probably ways to do data centers sustainably, but only if the corporation is going to come in with that as their mindset, right? And inevitably that will cost a corporation more money. And so I don't know if there's a particular industry that I would be like, oh, you should be doing this or that. I think lots of industries are in a place where they can move to being a sustainable business. It's a matter of, are they bringing that intention to what they want to do? And is that a priority for the community, right? Like, I think that's the bigger question. Is the community asking these questions of industry before they come in to the community? How are you going to fit here? How are you going to treat your employees? What kind of living wages are you going to provide for them? You know, those are questions that are more important than like, yep, we're going to come in and put a building down, right? Like, and if they don't do that, being able to be like, well, sorry, maybe we're not the place for you, right? Like, it definitely becomes having a value and an ethic and an ethos that you're like, no, the bottom line isn't the only factor that's going to drive our decision making, right? You're going to prioritize the social aspects of that and the environmental impact of it.
So that sounds like a potential topic that would be in a sustainability plan for the city is to talk about that, because whether it's, well, any kind of development, and my understanding of, whether it's housing or industrial, those folks with the capital are going to ask the city the question is, well, what's your plan? What is your expectation? Rather than trying to come up with these things sort of ad hoc as it's developing. Like, for example, if folks showed up tomorrow and said, we want to build a data center and it's going to use this much electricity, what would be our response? Do we have ideas written down? Do we have?
Great point.
Yeah. And this sort of gets back to the conversation we had earlier this summer with Adam about the zoning code rewrites and
Exactly what I was just going to say. I mean, this process is playing out right now in our community, right? Because this is the zoning conversation, basically. So as Adam leads a lot of those groups, I mean, that's where a lot of that intentionality can find its way into policy.
Okay, let me ask this question. Go ahead.
Basically, in terms of energy, what forms of sustainable energy are you more looking at? I know you talked about geothermal. Have you considered nuclear?
We did actually have a nuclear conversation not all that long ago, and it did not go anywhere. So I don't think that's on the table currently. It was based more on an emergency management end. But quite honestly, part of where we are too is like, I don't have those answers yet. That will be part of the work as we look at the carbon neutrality plan and think about decarbonization. We will need to do a broader utility study of the campus to figure out like what our capacities are based on the footprint of what we have available, how our buildings are being used. And so like there's probably a whole array of things out there, and I don't think we're going to know what those are or what we're going to recommend, like here, this is what we do, until we have a chance to study that.
Considering that solar is basically the cheapest form of energy at this point, nuclear is the most expensive, My personal thought would be solar rather than nuclear, but
Yes, but I'm more sort of looking at this as a reliability. Nuclear plants provide the most amount of energy, and they tend to be some of the most reliable. A lot of the cost to nuclear is because of regulations. So I'm wondering sort of like, will you diversify into maybe not nuclear, but maybe hydroelectrical, various forms of wind, some sort of geothermal, maybe some sort of like bio.
I'd love to see one of those helical windmills on campus.
Yeah, I mean, I think as Dave said, at this point, we're very open-minded, and like we did have some consulting already, probably more of that in the future, a lot of, just more studies, honestly, and feasibility, and making sure we have like multiple avenues. There's, there's environmental cost to any form of energy, so there's no form of energy that we currently have that doesn't have some environmental cost, so that's something to factor in as well.
And then there is the issue of technological innovation.
Correct, right, we don't know what will be available 5 years from now, 10 years,
The last issue of National Geographic had a really great article on where fusion energy is at. And so we're going to see that in the future. And that'll be a huge game changer. So, But multiple sources. I think that's sort of the bottom line.
Yeah.
It's not the old coal-fired plant. I mean, that's being replaced for a lot of reasons, not just carbon emissions. That's a huge one, but the fact that it's not the most efficient anymore and it's sort of obsolete. But because also there's all these other forms of energy available, and a lot of them are cheaper.
I mean, going back to that time in college where we did the sustainability study, we actually took a tour of the coal plant that was still operating at that time at UW-Eau Claire. It provided power partly to the campus and partly to the hospital right next door. And it was something hearing that up until they had expanded their bunker to hold the coal physically, there were no rail lines that went through Eau Claire, so all the coal had to be physically trucked in, and for a very long time they didn't have enough space to store enough coal for a long weekend. So it's like,
wow.
You'd come to the end of Thanksgiving weekend. It's like, so we're out of coal. We can't make power until, Monday morning the coal truck delivers our next round of coal. And so, it was wild. But then I guess the hospital decided that they could not support getting power directly from coal first, and then at that point campus wasn't going to run it by themselves. But it's not all that long ago, but we've come a long way.
Okay, I think we're coming up on 7 o'clock, and if you don't mind hanging around for a few more minutes, we're just going to cover the remaining agenda items. And so on the next agenda item is just our meeting calendar, which I sent out an update to everybody. And, so it kind of gives you what we covered here in 2025. And then for December, we're going to bring in Silvia Lopez, who's our new city contact for Focus on Energy. And that's a program that the city has used quite successfully, saved a lot of dollars, gotten grants from, and she is the replacement for the person who's retiring, and she's going to bring us up to date on where that program is and if there's any new things coming down the road that the city might be able to take advantage of. So when the police department was here, they talked about this building. They still have some windows they want to replace, for example. So there's still some of the low-hanging fruit that we're still working on as a city, and should finish that. And then in February, we're going to meet with we're going to take January off. I don't have anything on the calendar because it's coming right off of the holidays.
I say, isn't it New Year's Day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to, I'm assuming you don't want to meet.
Yeah.
So let's just take January off, and we can use the time, like we learned tonight, we've got some research and reading to do and some commenting to do, and I know Adam Kuhn wants to hear from us as far as feedback. And then we have the City of Middleton coming up in February. That's going to be a Zoom call. And so January will kind of give us prep time there, and then Recycling Connections requested that they meet with us, so we got them scheduled for March.
Yay.
Great. And
That's
then
awesome.
we're going to roll, get going more on this discussion about our planning process and how that's going to look in collaboration and that kind of thing. So in the meantime, send me any of your feedback on future topics, but as we roll into spring, we should probably just have a meeting set aside just for talking about our planning process. Kind of like what we heard tonight, at a smaller scale, given the numbers that we have to work with.
Right.
But we could start putting together that roadmap, and I think it would be good just to devote a meeting to the roadmap, if that makes sense? Okay, so that covers the calendar, and so then item 4, it's just on there to sort of remind us what we've been talking about tonight, which is we can look at what the university is doing, we can look at what Middleton is doing, what other folks are doing, and then we want to set aside a meeting to talk about all of that and say, okay, let's put together our process. And I'm going to try to work on, I guess one of the things I wanted to mention is I'm going to work on trying to compile what we've learned to date with meeting with all the different departments, because as we discussed tonight, it was sort of jogging my memory about what some of our department heads were talking about. And that sort of makes me realize that there is this overlap and there's these common topics that come up. So when we talk about collaboration, I mean, yeah, that's absolutely essential for resilient communities is to collaborate. And actually there's quite a bit of overlap. So.
We could probably, I would say, not plagiarize, but take what you guys have done as a good starting point.
Hey, I don't know about that. No, absolutely. I did want to say too, like if you, it sounds like you've been talking to a lot about like department heads and stuff like that, but if you're interested in doing like public engagement sessions or those kind of things, I mentioned it briefly, but I'll just mention it again. We used, so the Nature Conservancy has something called the Community Resilience Building Workshop. And all of their materials are online. Like you can just Google Nature Conservancy CRB for like community resilience building. And they have like facilitation guides and materials, and it's all free. And if you had any questions about our experience, like utilizing that as a resource, you could definitely reach out to us. We could let you know about that.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think that would be one of my like big first steps I would like to take would be like have a PIM, like a public involvement meeting.
Yeah.
For sure.
Definitely.
Just kind of like how you guys have your list of priorities. I would also like to do that with our residents on like a hopefully a larger scale.
Yeah.
Okay, so that would be an excellent topic then when we have our planning meeting.
A survey monkey kind of survey or like meetings, so you just.
I guess both.
It's going to probably have to be, I mean.
Be all of the things.
Yeah, kind of like how Adam was talking about how he's had to do for his. I don't know that we'll go that extreme,
but at least.
But multifaceted, for sure, I would think.
In person, yeah, and online, just so we can kind of, tackle all, I guess, generations as well, because older generations might not be on social media. So, and like a print ad even too, getting the word out, press release, all that kind of stuff.
I like that.
Okay.
Great idea.
Is there any other topic or item of business that folks would want to mention here? If not, I will entertain I'll just mention item number 5, next Sustainability Commission is December 4th, 5:30. Silvia Lopez, Energy Advisor for Focus on Energy. So I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll motion.
Thank you guys for coming.
Yes,
tonight.
thank you.
No worries. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Do you want a second?
I'll second.
Oh, second. Okay, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, thanks, everyone.
A video of this meeting is available for viewing on the city's website, stevenspoint.com/videos.